An 8-year-old migrant from Panama died in U.S. Border Patrol custody on Wednesday after crossing the border with her family, CBS reports. The young girl had a heart condition and passed away after experiencing a medical emergency inside a Border Patrol station in Harlingen, Texas. Secretary of Foreign Affairs Enrique Honduras has identified the girl as Anadith Tene Reyes Alvarez. Honduras has called for a, quote, thorough investigation into her death, according to CBS.
Last week, a 17-year-old migrant boy from Honduras died in the custody of a Florida facility that was sheltering, quote, unaccompanied minors from the Department of Health and Human Services. NBC reports the boy, who was named Angel Eduardo Maradiaga Espinosa, entered the department's care on May 5th and, quote, received a clean bill of health, according to someone familiar with the matter. But then on May 10th, he was taken to a hospital where he passed away. Secretary Honduras also called for an investigation into Espinosa's death, NBC writes. So we've seen an increase of deaths at the border, Amber, in recent years. Year over year, it's increasing quite dramatically. I'm not sure what's going to come of these investigations, because it seems to me that nothing really ever comes of these investigations at the border. They're not investigated thoroughly, and the increasing numbers of deaths at the border is concerning to me as well. I don't know if it's a lack of resources, a lack of care, or just intentional neglect. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's probably most likely a lack of resources. I remember a similar death of a migrant child occurred under Trump, and similarly, there was a lot of outrage initially. And then as details came out, it turned out that the girl had been suffering with a fever, and the father had basically rejected medicine or medical care until she was basically beyond the point of saving. So we really don't know until the full story comes out. But what I will say is that, to me, this is a story about the dangerous consequences of people encouraging illegal crossings, because the reality is that these people who are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador are trekking hundreds, if not thousands of miles on foot. A lot of them are paying human traffickers and coyotes who don't care about their well-being at all. About a third of the women who make this journey will be sexually abused by people who are supposed to be taking care of them. And then there's also just the potential for physical death, whether it's drowning from crossing the Rio Grande River, baking to death in the back of a hot tractor trailer because the coyote fled after he crossed the border. I mean, these situations, unfortunately, are not few and far between. They happen with great frequency. And there should be no U.S. policy that tells people that if they come to the border through these dangerous means, that they're going to be able to stay in the U.S.
Yeah, when I look at the figures of fiscal year over fiscal year, the deaths, in 2020, 254 at the border, 2021, 568 deaths at the border, and then last year, 890 deaths at the border. It's escalating at an extremely rapid pace. But I also think about, okay, if you are detained at the southern border, we've had all kinds of narratives come out about the resources that they have there. I remember when there was a baby formula shortage, there were all of these photos taken of supplies at the border. It ended up not actually being baby formula, but just powdered milk, which is not something that you can give to an infant. So this blame that all of the baby formula was at the border was a bit ridiculous. But I really think about people coming into the United States, which I believe they should have a right to do as migrants and especially as asylum seekers. But I think about the access to healthcare that people born in the United States have. It's not there for them either. Many people die because they can't afford healthcare in the United States because it's so expensive. They delay care and wait to the point where they're literally about to die before they go to the emergency room, and then they can incur a lifetime of medical debt. And so when I think about what happens at the southern border, if someone arrives and is sick, it's not incredibly different from someone who is working class, born in the United States.
Right, and that's why I would challenge your claim that people have a right to come into the U.S., because when citizens aren't getting the care that they need, when U.S. citizens are being put out of work by illegal immigrants, I think it's kind of absurd to say that they should be allowed in. We know that the majority of asylum claims end up being not legitimate. Economic migration is a real thing. A lot of people come to the U.S. in search of a better life, but under asylum law, that's not a reason for being granted asylum. And a lot of people are abusing the asylum process. They come to the southern border hoping that they're going to sneak past Border Patrol, and if they get caught, They claim asylum, and all of a sudden, because they've stepped a foot on U.S. soil, they get to stay in the U.S. indefinitely for 2-3 years until their immigration case comes up. Even if they get removed at that time, they've already basically spent a significant period of time here and used U.S. resources, not to mention the fact that a lot of people don't even show up for their court hearing.
Yeah, I do think about the issue of the impact of immigration on the economy a little bit differently. When I think about the labor shortage that folks at every level are talking about, whether you're the CEO of a company saying nobody wants to work anymore, what they're really saying is nobody wants to take a job for a wage that is so low that you cannot afford to live because the cost of living is so high in the United States. You can't say that there's a complaint of a labor shortage and then say we can't have migrant workers come in because they'll displace our jobs. It seems to me that what's going on very clearly is that it's a greed problem on behalf of corporations who want to pay workers less than their labor is worth. They have higher profit margins in recent years than ever before, so they're not hurting for cash, and that's not why they're paying workers. They're intentionally greedy, trying to exploit the labor. So I would point to the CEOs of these corporations and the decision makers of keeping wages low and prices high as the reason workers are struggling. There's
well, I don't
plenty
disagree
of work
with
to
that,
do.
but Jessica, if that's the case, and the reason people don't want to take certain jobs is because the wages or benefits are too low or the conditions are poor, why would you want to subject illegal immigrants or legal immigrants to those conditions?
It's not so much about subjecting them to those conditions. Obviously, the corporation should pay more. There should be higher wages for everyone. What it's really about is the United States waging regime change wars all across Latin and Central America, creating instability across these regions and opening it up so that people who are capable of great violence end up being in control. Their governments and institutions that have been in place for quite some time are then degraded thanks to our actions abroad. Now these people want to flee regions of violence and come to the United States. I don't think the problem is the free-flowing movement of humans who want to live somewhere else or maybe take a job, in California working on a farm. I don't think that is a problem or a crime, especially when they're fleeing a lot of violence that begins and ends with the United States. And the same corporations that are exploiting our labor here have exploited labor abroad. U.S.-based multinational corporations colluding with the foreign policy establishment. You have John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles, who represented these corporations with Sullivan and Cromwell, and then got appointed to be the Secretary of State and the head of the CIA. It's very clear where the connections are and where the priorities are. And working people in the U.S., Mexico, Central America, and Latin America, and those born here are at the consequence of the hands of folks who aren't afraid to use violence to accumulate more power and wealth.
I agree that regime change wars are awful and the U.S. shouldn't be involved in them. And also that CEOs certainly exploit foreign labor because they can get away with paying them lower wages and put them in horrific conditions. But the problem is when illegal immigrants come in and take those jobs that we're talking about that Americans allegedly don't want to work, then you're not having people who are able to be tracked by the system. You're not having people who have the same legal rights and benefits that American workers do. And so they do end up getting taken advantage of. The New York Times did an investigation a couple of months ago about the effect that Biden's border policy has had on migrant children in particular. And they found that 12 to 15-year-olds were working night shifts in factories without paperwork. And the response from these companies, including Ben & Jerry's, which is supposed to be this progressive bastion of human rights, was claiming, well, it's no big deal because our factory believes in good conditions for workers. So even if we have a 12-year-old on the line, who cares? I mean, that to me is just unconscionable.
Yeah, I think when I consider the economic ramifications of what's going on, it's like we have a choice where we can regulate corporations and say it's unacceptable that you're paying wages that are so much lower than what's required to live in the United States. Someone should not work 40 hours a week and still be unable to pay rent and bills and have a kid and go to school if they want to. The American dream is at a loss because of corporations being greedy. And so when you're faced with a decision, we have enough real productive resources to be put to use and be more productive as a society if more people come in and work. Okay, that's an option. But they're going to make wages low and exploit people's labor. So what's your choice? Are we going to regulate the corporations and allow people to come in who want to be in the United States, who are clearly going to come in anyway? Or are we going to say you can't come in and we're still going to have those same exploitation problems? That's like really the dichotomy I see with the immigration issue.
I think we secure the border and then also regulate corporations, but we'll agree to disagree on this one. We're going to have to wrap there. That does it for us this week on Rising. Jessica, it was a real pleasure co-hosting with you again this Friday.
As always, thanks, Amber.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for tuning into Rising, and we'll see you next week.